What's a city in the 21st century? What about the changing nature of the polis in Europe? What if we try to think of and beyond what pragmatically comes to our view that we progressively forget in our everyday life routine? Stepping out of where we normally live might be a solution to discover how to be better actors of our social dimension. Who's a member of the polis? Is this a necessarily border space? How does culture create a common space, a res publica? This is the basis on which the organization European Alternatives worked to set the direction of the event Polis 21.
Polis 21 is taking place in Athens, Belgrade and Zagreb. That might seem like an unexpected series of cities to run a project in, and we take it as a virtue that it is unexpected. One of the challenges in Europe today is to create new relations between cities which don't currently exist, and as a matter of fact Athens, Belgrade and Zagreb are relatively close together, and yet it's reasonably difficult at least to get between Athens and Belgrade or Zagreb, which shows that there's not perhaps as much exchange as one might hope between them.
The Belgrade event took place in the famous Center for Cultural Decontamination on the question of the borders in the city, with the participation of Borka Pavicevic, founder of the center hosting Polis 21, philosopher Stephen Wright, Manja Ristic and Petar Milat. The first part of the meeting focused on transformations Belgrade has been experiencing since the end of ex-Yugoslavia and of the war. Then discussions carried on analyzing the current situation in Belgrade regarding ownership and privatization of public space.
What came out from the discussions with the Serbian participants was that one of the main process that has led to new form of exclusions in the city is really the transition from state property or collectively owned property to capitalism, and that has happened in the last 20 years really. Privatization of the space has reduced the possibility for this type of collective action or collective expression to happen. For instance, Belgrade participants described how some of the spaces which are before empty spaces because there were not any buildings, because there were the spaces between the high towers, have been reused and have been built in for new commercial activity, for shops, etc., or have been privately acquired by people for private use, and how this private use created division between the people who could access to it and people who cannot.
The day after, we hop on the train that will take us to Zagreb for the last Polis 21 stage. On the way to Croatia, I try to understand something more about European alternatives and get a bit deeper into its transnational philosophy.
Transnationalism is what we feel like we're trying to define by the practice of European alternatives. European alternatives, at least in my understanding of our day-to-day work, is an experimental organisation which is trying to work beyond national boundaries and, in a certain sense, trying to forget about national boundaries, or to try and interrogate any national concepts that come into our thinking or our practices when we try and engage with political or cultural questions. We don't come at this with a preconceived idea of what transnationalism might be, but more the feeling that a new form of political collectivity needs to be defined quite urgently in the contemporary political and cultural context, and the only way of trying to define it is actually by trying to enact it. And so European Alternatives is both a theoretical organisation and produces theoretical works, so the journal, the dialogical elements of events, but also, and increasingly I might say, an attempt at organisation of people actually. And the very basic way that expresses itself is actually in the way we try and organize the way our offices work, trying to resist the temptation, for example, to say that Bologna deals with the people in Italy and all the content in Italian, and Paris does France and what's in French, but actually trying to find new transnational ways of working together as individuals, and to understand each other as citizens, actually, on this renewed basis.
At the Center for Independent Culture and Youth of Zagreb, European Alternatives met the international conference Exit Europe to carry on the debate about public space in the city. The event aimed to reflect with Exit Europe on the potentialities for independent cultural spaces to promote political debate and democratic participation, considering with the participants cooperation strategies from the local to the European and international level.
I think that public space is an imaginary entity. It's not only concrete. It also has an immaterial quality to it, and that is that it's a particular place and a particular space that public conversation and public conflictuality plays itself out. And we are living in a society which allows very little space for public articulation, first and foremost because there is a censorship, very particular kind of censorship in the media, which is capital-based. Second, politics is non-divisive and project-based and public opinion-based, and therefore populism prone. So I think that public space in that sense is getting narrower and narrower, and it requires more and more radicality or seeming radicality to provoke this medium of public conversation and conflict to come into vision, to emerge. And if we speak about the materiality of public space, it's in the city. It's increasingly under the tension of the capital and real estate investments. Now, at this moment of crisis, less so, but the crisis will be sooner or later gone, and the disempowerment and disenfranchisement of the public in the space will continue.